Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about this very important incident that took place about 15 years ago. I'm talking about the 8th of October 2005, when the entire area was jolted by an earthquake. That was 7.6 at the Richter scale, and that was, I think, one of the deadliest disasters in the history of Pakistan. Almost 75,000 people died, as we all know, in that very, very unfortunate incident. And if you look at the other numbers, it is believed that around 138,000 people were also injured in that particular earthquake. And according to estimates, around 3.5 million people rendered homeless as well. And this also figures varies. According to certain numbers, it could be 3.8, but just imagine you're talking about 3.5 million people who were left homeless. And then we're also talking about the role of NDMA and ERA. This is something very important because ever since these two institutions were created, they were primarily constructed to look after the affairs, whether you're talking about floods or any natural calamity or something of that sort. And the way, after that, the way the Pakistani people stood by their Kashmiri brothers and sisters, I mean, that was phenomenal. The kind of help that was also given by the international community was well over $7 billion, well over the exactly required amount. But what exactly has happened over the last 15 years, we'll be throwing light on that aspect. And we'll also be telling you about the current situation out there. Because when you talk about the size of Switzerland, literally, when you look at the entire area of KPK and Kashmir, that is almost the size of the area of Switzerland. Just imagine, totally destroyed. Around 19 to 20,000 children who were in their schools, they got killed as well. And people who were injured, most of them, I mean, the kind of injuries they had, they could not be treated out there, as most of these medical facilities were also totally shattered. So it was primarily Pindi, Islamabad and a couple of other cities that was totally dedicated for looking after the people who got injured in that earthquake. Now, first of all, let me quickly introduce you to our, rather, we'll show you a report first, and just go through this report, and then after that I'll introduce you to our guest.
अल्लाह रहम करे, अल्लाह फजल करे। ये ज़ल्ज़ला है और बड़ा शदीद ज़ल्ज़ला है। अल्लाहु अकबर, अल्लाहु अकबर, अल्लाहु अकबर।
On October 8, 2005, at 8:50 a.m., a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck the Himalayan region and Kashmir. Its epicenter was 19 kilometers northeast of Muzaffarabad. According to the National Disaster Management Authority, over 87,350 people lost their lives, while over 138,000 were injured. It affected more than 500,000 families and 780,000 buildings, including 17,000 schools, with all major hospitals destroyed to varying degrees, leaving 3.5 million homeless. Around 250,000 farm animals were also killed due to collapses of stone barns. Today is the 15th anniversary of the 2005 earthquake, the worst seismic disaster in the country's history that killed over 87,000 people in its northeast. We as a nation should evaluate and reiterate commitment to be better prepared to face natural calamities and show resolve to reduce the risk of disasters. We express solidarity and sympathy with families affected by such natural calamities. We also praise fellow Pakistanis who had exhibited courage, selflessness, sacrifice, and resilience in the face of catastrophe.
Now, to talk about this, let me introduce you to our guest first. We have with us in our studio on my right is Dr. Aiza Yazani Abid Saiba. She's a PhD in educational psychology. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking out your time and talking to us. We also have with us Shazia Harish. She's the advisor, media NDMA and PEMRA. Ma'am, thank you so much for your time as well. And we'll also be talking to the chairman NDMA and ERA, and we'll be also having a word with the former Prime Minister of AJK, Sultan Mahmood Chaudhry Sahab. Ma'am, now, since we'll be talking about this very, very tragic incident that occurred exactly 15 years ago, and I still remember it is just like a dream in my mind, and I can still remember each and every second of that. I can still hear the voice of the earthquake, and then whatever happened after that, nobody can forget that, I guess. But ma'am, let me quickly start off from Lieutenant General Muhammad Afzal Sahab, who is the chairman NDMA and ERA. He's just joined us. Assalamu alaikum, General Sahab. And thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to us. General Sahab, my first question to you is today, since it's the 15th anniversary of the 2005 earthquake, do you feel we are now prepared to face such natural disasters and calamities of that magnitude? Your take, sir.
Definitely we are ready for any calamity, and you must have seen that in last 1 year we have faced 3 different kind of disasters in the country, and you must be very happy to see the performance of National Disaster Management Authority. Last year we had earthquake in Mirpur. We were right up to the task. In January this year, January onward, we had the locust attack which started coming in, and Alhamdulillah, Pakistan is the first country in the entire world which is now free from this, and we are hoping that is not going to affect us in the next year. This was the one which was brought out from the last year, and you must have also seen that NDMA played a very active part in Corona, fighting Corona, COVID-19, and now in recent days you must have seen that we were in the limelight in Karachi. We are working in Sindh, and we are working very actively with the government of Sindh, government of federal government, and we are also working very actively with the local army formation to look at Karachi for a perspective where Karachi is not affected by such calamity in future.
All right. Now, General Sahab, second important point is about the course of action that needs to be undertaken. For example, how to avoid the future damages from all such disasters, whether they are natural disasters in the form of an earthquake, a flood, or maybe like locust you just mentioned. How can we eliminate? I mean, what is the level of preparedness you have at NDMA and ERA?
Well, what we are doing is that we are looking at NDMA to be a kind of body which is capable of fighting all kind of calamities. And to this end, what we are doing is that we are in the process of subsuming Earthquake Rehabilitation Authority. You must have already been knowing. I am also requesting government to look at NDMA, a body which is capable of withstanding the shocks. It is capable of planning the future projects in a way that these carry out mitigation, or not only the mitigation but the prevention mode projects. And all these projects we have designed it in a manner that there is no money which is required to be funded by Government of Pakistan. We are also working on a different analogy of risk management, where we are looking at going for the insurance, number one. Number two, we are looking at creating a risk management fund which should be capable of giving relief to the people within 48 to 72 hours. Similarly, we are looking at large number of projects on a public-private basis in a manner that those projects basically remain in the realm of prevention mode, and we should be looking at those projects in a manner that not only that these projects give you back money in the shape of your disaster risk management fund, but also prevent the damages which are likely to come. We, with the help of Chinese in Quaid-e-Azam University, we are opening up earthquake and disaster management institute, which would be working purely on earthquake, so that we are capable of getting warnings, we are capable of designing houses and all the related aspects. Similarly, in longer term or short to mid term, in fact, we are looking at upgrading the National Institute of Disaster Management into a disaster management university. And this university would be important education in three important aspects. Number one, the civil engineering with a special focus on the disaster management. It would have undergrad, master's and PhD classes. Similarly, it would also look at the disaster financial management. And let me also tell you that we need to understand that our country, we are losing between $3 to $4 billion every year, and every 5 years we are losing around $15 to $20 billion. So we need to look at this aspect very, very carefully. Whatever we are doing from PSTP fund or development fund, that is being wasted because of the earthquake. So we need to look at our financial development more in a quite realistic and a different manner. And lastly, another important subject which I would like to start it in this university is the supply chain management for such disasters, which now I have experienced in covert as well as in locust fighting.
All right, Jalal Saab, thank you very much for your comments for the future. Now, ma'am, moving on to you now. First of all, the most important area is when you talk about a disaster of that magnitude. Obviously, ma'am, after 15 years, we still remember the psychological effects are still there, and so many children, they lost their parents, they lost their siblings. I mean, it was an absolute disaster. I mean, every single house had a story to share. Ma'am, now since I'm sure you meet people and you talk about this issue also, what about the mindset? Do you think people have, in fact, they're done and dusted with this idea, or it still prevails in their mind, still haunts them?
Very interesting that you ask this. I think we just sort of move on. Daily life takes us from one thing to the next. And all of us, we have our individual stories within us. What I've noticed that these stories are not coming up in your national literature, national songs, anything. They are not being reflected in your culture, only the mundane day-to-day thing. I look at it from this point of view because I was in Karachi when this happened, and the effect it had on me being there, and I lost nobody in the earthquake, but I went through, and then secondly, what people went through. Now, it changed the course of my work, so I became a trauma therapist. I studied vicarious trauma. So when you say the effect, so first effect is with the people who were the victims, and then the first responders who come on that. So those are the most affected people, and then there are the people like you and me who are, on the sides and they're further removed from it. Unfortunately, here we don't look at the mental aspect of things. In this time, 15 years by now, I would have expected a very good response, emergency response developed by all agencies, all educational institutions, how to manage, how to cope. It's a standard response to duck down, to make a line, to be quiet, to be orderly, how to organize. Nothing of that has entered our routine. Nothing is in our psyche, so we haven't really practiced anything.
Primarily, but you're saying most of the schools, they're not teaching this or guiding, how to respond to something of that sort.
Because what happened
like the drills we used to have, like fire drills and so on.
And they were very scary also, by the way. So we never went. So what happened was now left with you and me if we were in that earthquake. So when those people have PTSD. Now PTSD is a very strange sort of thing because it's when you are exposed to a severe traumatic situation. Then you go in shock, and after a while some symptoms stay with you, and they make you lose your sleep, then it affects your appetite, you get nightmares. There's a variety of, and it's such a strange PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, affects individuals of different ages differently. Okay, so why whole spectrum, but problem is because we never really emphasize mental health and the concept of being aggressive, and why is one aggressive again and again, and why is one taking drugs, because then of course there's a pattern of drug abuse also with that. Then there's a pattern of depression with that. So women tend to...
So when you are under this post-traumatic stress disorder, for that matter, PTSD. So these are the channels, you know, you look forward to. For example, drugs. Somebody would get into exercise, maybe if somebody is very positive. Somebody would end up committing suicide for that. You know, you never know. Every person has a different reaction according to the situation they have.
For instance, while you were talking about you giving an opening to the program, didn't you feel that you were back in time?
I could close my eyes and I could actually see those visuals.
Exactly. So the problem with such traumatic events is, whatever kind of traumatic event, the moment you think about it, your body takes you back at that moment, and all those symptoms, all those feelings, physical feelings that you had at that time, they come at this present moment. So we relive the trauma. So anybody who's been in any kind of trauma, until they get proper therapy and guidance and first aid, the first responders, the first way the person, the way handle in the situation, it affects the outcome. So you can see we have Mental Health Day, 10th October, just 2 days down the line, and there is no systematic, I would say, psychological response, how to deal with the people. I would have expected a lot of empathy to be developed in our people by now, but so we are only focusing on
the symptoms primarily, not addressing the real issue, the real problem.
Yeah, that you know, it's raining or it's flooding or this has happened. So we focus on the physical reality too.
Now I'm coming to you, since you're the person who's involved with the ERA and NDMA, and these two institutions basically came into being right after this very, very tragic incident. And then we got to know that this is also at a provincial level, at the very basic district level also. Ma'am, first of all, since it's been 15 years, obviously the NDMA, that you've been with so many chairmen also, you know, as far as the work is concerned, I'm sure things must have improved over a period of time.
Yes.
Now, ma'am, when we spoke to the general, he mentioned that, well, I think pretty decent steps have been taken. A lot has been happening, a lot will happen. Now look at what we did regarding the locust attack, this pandemic problem of COVID-19, flooding in Karachi or elsewhere in Pakistan. You talk about any issue, I mean, the actual responsibility is always handed over to NDMA now. It is your headache, you look after. But we do not do much prior to the actual problem. I mean, once it is there, you know, the ad hoc approach, or maybe we are very reactive rather than being proactive. So your take on that part, ma'am. How satisfied are you with the performance of this particular institution?
Well, if Dr. Saab took me to 2005. At that time, we were like kind of not at all prepared. We didn't know what to do. The thing happened, and there was no institution in the country to handle that massive a disaster. Now, what
CDA had no machinery to take care of the rubble there, the debris.
Nobody was. Exactly. Now, this is a disaster which is spread over 35,000 square kilometers. We have 3.5 million homeless. What to do about that? Imagine. Dead bodies, and I remember.
And within a matter of a minute.
Minutes. So what we had built, we used to say, what we had built over years went in few seconds. Dr. Saab was talking about post-traumatic disorder. It is very closely related to the disaster management cycle, which talks about prevention. So I have to prepare my kids, I have to prepare the nation, I have to prepare the people of my country to take preventive actions before the disaster is going to strike. For that, I think we have come a long way, and as NDMA, the role of NDMA, you would be reading that there is technology being used, there is an all-inclusive approach which is being used. There are women's centers that have been developed in Mirpur as outreach for women who are being abused, because when there is a calamity, women are the easy hit targets and the kids are easy hit targets. Why? Because you get angry, there is no more what to do, there are fights in the house, and then it comes to physical violence. So those centers have been developed after the Meepur, so we learned from. So we have come a long way. Technology, databases are being set up at NDMA to keep an eye, and then SPARCO is also helping us to see what is happening. So I think
what exactly SPARCO does, and what sort of help do you get from them?
We started it in earthquake also, to have an aerial view of where the damage was and what could be done about it. So we have moved technologically. This is what I would say. We are moving into the prevention phase more. We have moved into it, and we are prepared. Like, for example, thinking about the COVID, for example, we are prepared. What if there is a second wave? NDMA is ready to come up with whatever health facilities would require if there is a bad situation, God forbid, if it comes up. So yes, we have learnt that. Why is it not known to public? Because we are not communicating properly.
I think it's very important that people should know when there is this institution that is supposed to look after the issues of
so things are at times mixed up. At times it is mixed up. NDMA should have done that. ERA should have done that, which probably is.
What's the difference between the functions of ERA and NDMA?
Look,
and why are they being merged together now?
Look, ERA was formed in response to that massive disaster, in which, I was going to shift into Urdu, which destroyed an area of 35,000 square kilometers. Yep. There were 12 sectors which were totally destroyed. Education, health, governance, livelihood, social sector, roads, bridges, everything was gone. So we were mandated to reconstruct and rebuild what was destroyed in earthquake 2005. By that time, experts in the field, we learned in the field. We were not experts in the beginning. We didn't know anything, to be very honest. Pakistan, even the world didn't know much about it. So Pakistan was I must add this, and I call it with a lot of pride, that Pakistan was the first country where the cluster approach was adopted. And this is now an approach which is recommended by UN to be adopted wherever the disaster is.
So when it comes to the case study regarding this particular earthquake, I mean, you think it was managed very well?
Oh, it was.
Because the terrain was very different, ma'am. The weather was changing. I still remember the very next day, on the 9th of October, it was raining. Not only in Islamabad, even in Muzaffarabad. There was no light. Exactly.
Then the winters were coming. But do you know that there were no pneumonia patients? We didn't have outbreak of pneumonia.
That could have been another disaster.
So we are really good at responding to a disaster. And the second thing was that the UN mentioned this emergency and disaster response as world's #1. It was mentioned that this is the best civil, military, and international communities and the nation's response to the earthquake.
I think the response of the nation in terms of distributing cash or kind for that matter, that was
beautiful.
Unbelievable. I mean, you just imagine this Barakau road was totally choked because people had sent so much and we had no idea what to do with it, and how to sort of, make it move forward. Now, ma'am, another important area, as I mentioned, now talking about the floods, we can always predict that the monsoon season has changed, or maybe the monsoon is shifting from east to west, so you end up having a lot of rain in Balochistan, and so on and so forth. Similarly, ma'am, we can always tell about, for example, locust. If it is coming from the African side, we can tell, well, it is going to be entering Pakistan through Afghanistan or whatever. You can manage, you can plan. But when it comes to an earthquake, I mean, God knows, because it is going to hit you sooner or later, but you can't tell the time. So you can't be prepared 24/7 also. That is also pretty ridiculous when you talk about it. But, ma'am, such mega disasters, I mean, always leave a mark. So, do you think the nation in general has learnt what we should have learnt actually? Are we moving in the right direction? Because when it comes to giving taxes, we hardly give taxes. But when it comes to distributing money for a generous cause, honestly speaking, nobody is going to look at their pocket. I mean, they would just give.
Exactly.
So, ma'am, as a nation, as a resilient nation, let's talk about that.
I would agree with Ma'am Shazia. The response of the institution was very good. it was a structured response,
Yes.
and it's acknowledged world over. Particularly with the COVID-19 response, I see a great like a structured planning with that, right? Now the problem is that institutions are very efficient, and they are on the top of it, and they're handling. And like she said, we are not communicating with the masses. So that's where the gap comes in. It's where people who have very little education, who have very little understanding, who have very little resources, so they don't know what to do and how to manage. So if there's a natural disaster, how do they cope? They cope with the best whatever they have, with the best available mental and physical resources. So what I, as a psychologist, always focus on: how do individuals respond? Do they know what to do? Do they know how to take care of them? Now, I mentioned COVID-19. There were excellent SOPs for mental health, self-care, and I think this was I was not idle for a single moment during this lockdown, because we were.
United Nations has really appreciated
Yes,
the approach
yes,
Pakistan
yes.
adopted.
Yes. So you see, we responded, the psychologists, the medical professional, we all responded. Even we worked on a project with the Red Crescent Hospital in Islamabad. We wanted to work with the corona patients, and the doctor said, okay, but we also need it. So the awareness that stress reduction was so important, the mental health aspect, you see, that was acknowledged. Now the point is, it needs a consistent training. For example, response to a disaster, response to a terrorist attack, response to any sudden thing which you say, it requires this particular type of response. But if you have never had any training, if you have no idea, you would just run.
You'll be confused.
You'll be confused. I always mention,
like in Japan, ma'am,
Yeah.
I often see these drills in schools.
Yes.
That God forbid, if there's an earthquake, every kid knows exactly what to do. The teacher knows how to handle them and how to evacuate them on an ASAP basis.
For instance, the blast that we were having, everybody was rushing, and then there was a second blast, and there would be a greater life
Damage,
loss.
yes.
But everywhere else, people are supposed to run away. Now, if we were to train individuals that when something of this, you lie down or you go away, move away. You can come back after a few minutes, but for the first moment, you have to take care of yourself. And this is where, in such a thing, the executive mind, your decision-making mind, it stops working. So you are just very impulsive. But only with rigorous exercise, and this is the disaster response we need to inculcate in the population.
This becomes a standard operating procedure.
Yes. So while we have the forces, they know what to do. They have the SOPs. So I'm very happy when I hear the word SOPs. Everybody's talking about SOPs at shops and everywhere, because finally we are understanding that there is a desired and a required way of working. But again, I tell you, to instill discipline, making people line up, wait for their turn, staying calm, or settling, whatever, and listening to one person at that time, because there will be one person who will be in natural command of his faculty,
Yep.
and that's the leader we need at that time. We don't want everybody to be leader. So we want one person to respond to the situation, while others will be very confused.
Just take charge and manage things.
Exactly. So this is the kind of awareness which needs to trickle down.
Ma'am, one more thing. Let's talk about COVID, because
Okay.
COVID is something, your enemy is invisible. You can't see, you can't tell. But at the end of the day, ma'am, we all are scared somewhere deep down, because we do not know about the disease. We end up hearing that this is the kind of effect it has. You can't breathe, and when you see those visuals, they're very scary. And God knows how many forms of COVID-19 exist, which you call the strain. So now, talking about the current situation, ma'am, everybody is having some sort of a toll in the mind. There's a constant knock that wash your hands, have shower, keep your distance from the other person. Keep cleaning your hands, don't touch your face, and so on and so forth. Well, is it also affecting our mind, the mental health?
Oh, it
and if
is.
so, how to cope up with it?
It is, so let's go back to like 10, 15 and even back. We have been affected by terrorist attacks and so many blasts. So, like I said, vicarious trauma. So, a whole generation has grown up with a hidden enemy. So, they are anxious about a lot of things, and they don't know why they are anxious. They have some level of PTSD. A lot of people have that, and it's never been diagnosed.
Is it visible on your face, or how do you determine that that person, he or she, is going through some sort of stress?
It comes out in their life, the way they are managing.
Is it the behavior?
Yes, it's behavior. And when they open up, then they tell you more about it, how it's affecting their lives, and then it's affecting relationships and how, you know, the violence, basically the violence level which is rising. So, so I would go back from there, and I would say, I think more than a generation. So it's a transgenerational trauma in my perspective. And so we are.
That's a very important point raised, ma'am. But if you allow me, we've been joined in by Barrister Sultan Mahmood Saab, the former Prime Minister of Azad Kashmir. Assalamu alaikum, Barrister Saab. Thank you very much, Barrister Saab, for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, first of all, sir, I would like your comment on today, sir. It's the 15th year since we went through a very bad phase, sir. We lost so many precious lives in Kashmir. So many people got injured. 20,000 kids lost their lives as well. Now, sir, first of all, your comment on this particular day, sir. And secondly, tell us how satisfied are you as far as the development work or otherwise things are concerned after almost a decade and a half?
Yes, I think 15 years have gone when this catastrophe happened in Kashmir. And your next question is how much satisfaction. I think a lot of donors committed that they will help us in relief, but nothing much came. And moreover, they thought that their own NGOs will help. So administrative costs also have risen because our locally NGOs or companies would have done a better job, but because they thought we are a corrupt country. But anyway, so still the people are suffering, still the houses are not built, and still a lot of people are in trouble. Some main roads were built and some donors built the hospitals or maybe colleges, but still common person is still suffering.
What sort of need is still existing there? So, for example, regarding the construction of schools, erecting the medical facilities for that matter, children going back to school again, people having the proper livelihood, so infrastructure development for that matter? Any particular area you'd like to throw light on?
I think the life has got normal. It's nothing like that because some people suffered. There's no doubt about that. Some people were injured, and some people got some mental distress. But still, the life is getting normal. But the problems and the development is still waiting somebody to help.
All right. Thank you very much, Barrister Saab, for your comments. Now, ma'am, one area, Barrister Saab says that, well, you know, nobody can be satisfied 100%. We expect too much. But obviously, you know, you have limited amount of supplies, you've got limited amount of time, you've got limited amount of resources. Otherwise, you can deliver, you can do whatever within your given capacity. But at the end of the day, the satisfaction level of the people living there, for whom you're working basically,
I would look at it from a different perspective, and I'll talk numbers. For example, all the pledged money, Pakistan is the only example where all the donors, sponsors, the international community gave the pledged money and has been spent. Afghanistan had a lot of pledged money, but the donors didn't come up. We had genuine problems because of difficult terrain.
You had over $7 billion US dollars. 6.5?
5.96, because it was foreign funding also, and then 2 billion was used in the relief time period, which was the Chinooks and which were the blankets and which were the other things. So the money left.
So primarily the rescue and relief, And then the rehab.
Exactly. And the early recovery period.
Okay,
also.
recovery as well,
For the, for
there
the
were so
early
many hours, I remember.
Yes.
5
Yes.
hours, if I'm not
5
wrong.
hours, yes. And then what happened was that number one, we had a very difficult train. We only had 5 to 6 months to reconstruct. So yes, there was delay in reconstruction because it is the snowy area. The third thing was that what we did was that the easy, accessible places were given to the donors and sponsors because we know that they move. If there is another disaster, they are going to go away. So the destruction was of such a massive level that it did take time, but out of like 14,000 identified 12 sectors, 10,000, over 10,000 have been built with constraints of the budgets also, with passing time.
And when I still remember when it comes to the health facilities, I remember Saudi Arabia made so many hospitals.
Saudi Arabia,
Cuba, they had the
have
best
made
medical
it. Turkey
facilities
has
to offer
done
to you. And on top, South Africa.
Yeah.
You name it, and they were there.
They were there. They were there. So, as far as what Barrister Saab said is, yes, we failed in one thing.
And what was that?
And that is managing expectations of the effectors.
That is the key, actually, ma'am. That's the most important area.
That's the key. We didn't. We were so busy working. We were so busy promising. We were so busy taking the hopes so high that the expectation management.
Ma'am, the
is
political
where,
intervention in certain cases, whenever it comes to decision-making process, I mean, that has also played a very negative role. I don't want you should comment on that because that is a different domain. But ma'am, there were hindrances, there were issues, and there were problems.
Well, you see, what we need to understand is that one was the 12 sectors we were working in, but we had to rebuild. I mean, 3 cities have been rebuilt: Muzaffarabad, Bagh, and Rawalakot.
From scratch, almost.
Yes. And there are projects which could have been affected by what you meant, but the government of Pakistan has done, I mean, you also know, you were there, I was there, everyone was just there. So yes, we lagged behind in kind of meeting the target of 14,000, but 10,000 has been done. And I think what we must do to evaluate an organization, we must look at the other organizations, the funding they received, and the groundwork, what they have delivered. And I rate it fairly high because we were not prepared, to be very honest.
But still, ma'am, now talking 15 years and talking about the present.
Yeah.
What exactly, ma'am, let's start off from you. What have we learned? I mean, I'm sure you must have seen that there are certain areas where we need to do a lot more. These are the weaknesses. This is where we have certain strengths. This is what we should avoid next time, and this is which should definitely capitalize on.
I think, if you let me say that, I think we don't learn from our mistakes. We continue taking risks, we continue living life in the moment. So as institutions may have learned and we may have done something, but then the floods keep on coming every year, you see. They haven't stopped, they haven't reduced, we haven't...
They'll increase most likely. Pakistan is going to be one of those most vulnerable countries. I think we'll be getting affected almost every year if we do not work, I mean, from today onwards on war footing.
Exactly. So the human factor, the HR factor is very important to consider, because you see the level of illiteracy and the disappointment of the people that so many things have not been done. I think it also comes down to is what the lack of skills, the lack of abilities of people to help themselves come out of the expectations from the state or the institutions is so high, so they expect to be bailed out every time. That's not possible for everyone. So people do come out of the disasters, a lot of time. Everybody can't be helped, and those who don't get help, they do manage to come out of it some way or the other, isn't that so? But the expectation here is that somebody will bail us out every time. So this is the thinking, the mindset that we need to work on. The fact that we have to work cohesively in a standardized manner, in a particular manner. We don't believe in prevention. We believe in bolting the barn after the horse has bolted. so we don't, we are not in favor of maybe polio vaccination. Oh, it's God's will. It is God's will, but the fact of the matter is that you have to take care of your livelihood and your life yourself. Isn't that so?
Yeah.
So that's the, we have amusement parks which have no proper belts, and they're very dangerous. But then until something doesn't happen, we are going topsy-turvy on that ride. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that's so true, ma'am. And certain incidents happened also where we lost precious lives.
Yes, but you see, nothing stops, and that's the most unfortunate part of it. That we are not researching, we are not learning, and we are not. We are a huge nation, by the way. So we have to.
In terms of number, yes.
Yes. So,
ma'am, closing remarks from you.
I would only say that what we need is a massive behavior change at a mass level, to be very honest. A behavior change has to be inculcated.
How can we do that?
Media?
You can't do that overnight.
No.
It's
Media,
long,
information, awareness campaigns. And I tell you one thing, when we made those houses, 600,000 houses are made, which were from the rock and how do you call garam,
the basic
from that,
substance
from the
required,
basic substance to earthquake resistant houses, it was a massive campaign that went through.
Those fabricated houses
And
you're talking
what
about.
the government this is my own personal view, what the government needs to do is keep a huge funding for media without shame to make people aware. For me as a communication person, for Dr. Sabha as maybe a psychologist who wants to make people aware, we get stuck when it comes to the money that I have to spend on media. And without information sharing and information change in behavior has to be inculcated for Pakistan to be more sustainable in coming days. Otherwise, it would be again people looking at someone to come and take them out of the mess, may it be climatic or man-made, which is not going to be possible because now world also, you saw in COVID hit the world as a whole. So nobody was coming as a donor or sponsor because everybody was stuck with
Concerned about themselves, yeah?
So we need to be self-resilient, and that is only by information and awareness.
But at least we should learn from our mistakes, as Dr.
Yeah.
Sahiba mentioned, and we need to move on. This is 2020. Things would be different. I mean, when it comes to resources, now I still remember when Hurricane Katrina struck Louisiana and the southern side of USA. I mean, everybody was crying that the government has not helped us. Maybe this is the area where most black people live, or maybe it is not as developed as California. The point is, ma'am, resources, I mean, nobody has more resources than the United States of America, but the level of destruction was so huge. It was a Cat 5 hurricane. So,
But then that reformed FEMA.
Yeah, this is what,
That
Federal
reformed
agency,
FEMA.
exactly.
So that's where NDMA and ERA merger will
So
help.
this is exactly what Pakistan did. But I hope that the institutions, because at the end of the day, ma'am, if you talk about Cuba, their medical, education, their medical facilities, they are at the optimum level. Small country, but known for that particular size, and they have been helping people. You talk about Turkey, you talk about so many other countries. I mean, you need to be an expert, but especially when you're so vulnerable like Pakistan, a lot more needs to be done. Anyway, thank you very much, Shazia Haris Sahaba. Dr. Sahab, it was a pleasure to have you. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.